Welcome to Holotropic Psychedelic Integration, Episode 3. I'm Art Granoff.
Yeah, and I'm James Moran.
Today we explore what are archetypes? A simple way to think about astrology. And Stan Grof explains archetypal astrology. But first, a slideshow. What is an archetype?
So, what are archetypes? So, in this slideshow, we're going to explore the concept here of archetype. And this slide has the earliest form of archetypal perspective. And in certain respects, its deeper ground is the primordial experience of the great gods and goddesses of ancient mythic imagination. So, our modern world, the word God or deity or divinity does not accurately convey the lived meaning of these primordial powers of the archaic sensibility, meaning that the meaning was sustained and developed in the Platonic understanding of the divine. So that's the next stage.
What are archetypes? Plato. In the Platonic view, archetype-like ideas or forms are absolute essences that transcend the empirical world, yet give the world its form and meaning. They're timeless universals that serve as fundamental reality, forming every concrete particular. Something is beautiful precisely to the extent that it participates in the archetype of beauty.
Yeah, so here we have Aristotle. So he was the next stage in the evolution. For Aristotle, the universal forms primarily exist in things. So they're not necessarily transcendent in the way of above or behind them. So one could say Plato was mystical, whereas Aristotle was not so much. So for Aristotle, as for Plato, form is the principle by which something can be known and its essence recognized. Its universal character distinguished with its particular embodiment.
What are archetypes? C.G. Jung, 1875, rediscovered the collective unconscious with mythology's importance of identifying archetypes. Jung described archetypes as autonomous primordial forms in the psyche that structure and impel all human experience and behavior.
We've got James Hillman here. Archetypal psychology. Let us imagine archetypes as the deepest patterns of psychic functioning, the roots of the soul governing the perspectives we have of ourselves and the world. They are automatic, self-evident images to which psychic life and our theories ever return. Like invisible crystals in solution are forms in plants that suddenly show forth under certain conditions, patterns of instinctual behavior like those in animals that direct actions along unswerving paths.
What are archetypes? Stanislav Grof, born 1931, Czech psychiatrist. As a young MD in Prague in the 1950s, Grof participates in initial consciousness research with LSD. Stan discovers the extended maps of the psyche that synthesize with ancient Eastern knowledge, shaping his holotropic, moving towards wholeness worldview. Post-session, we consolidate with Stan's extended cartography of the psyche, the perinatal and transpersonal domains, and personalize it with archetypal astrology.
Okay, so here we've got Rick Tarnas. So he was the protege of Stan Grof, who really kind of fleshed out the connection of archetypal astrology or of astrology with the archetypes and with the realms of the human subconscious that were mapped through psychedelic psychotherapy. So for conceptual clarity, when we consider the meaning and character of each planetary archetype, so we're beginning to bring in astrology, it will be useful to understand these principles in three different senses. The Homeric sense as a primordial deity or mythic figure, the Platonic sense as a cosmic or metaphysical principle, and the Jungian sense as a psychological principle associated with a specific planet.
What are planetary archetypes? Expressed as multivalence, each archetype expresses in numerous ways. The Saturn archetype can express itself as judgment, but also as old age, as tradition, but also as oppression, as time, but also as mortality, as depression, but also as discipline, as gravity in the sense of heaviness and weight, but also as gravity in the sense of seriousness and dignity.
All right, so what are planetary archetypes? The astrological thesis, as developed within the Platonic Jungian lineage, hold that these complex multidimensional archetypes governing the forms of human experience are intelligibly connected with the planets and their movements in the heavens. This association is observable in a constant coincidence between the specific planetary alignments and the specific archetypally patterned phenomenon in human affairs.
Thank you, Stan Grof and Richard Tarnas. Here's a simple way to think about astrology. I'm going to use a reference of a clock. Astrology is similar to a clock. What do we see in a clock? A circle with symbols and two arms. Here's our circle. Here's our symbols right here that mean certain things, right? And here's our arms or our hands. One of the hands moves slowly and one of the hands moves quicker. And using this device, we can tell what time it is. Similarly, with astrology, we use a circle with symbols in there that we may know or may not know. And when we add an arm, as an example, right there, we see it touches two planets. And that tells me what time it is, archetypally. Now, in the clock, we only have two arms, okay? So there's one time going on. In astrology, there's many things going on. So we have lots of different time going on at the same time. With the clock, stuff happens at certain times. It's 2 o'clock. That means we have a meeting, this is happening, or that's happening. It's 2 o'clock. Well, with astrology, we have many things happening at the same time, but don't get put off by it. It's just a matter of learning it. Here's an example. Yesterday was May 19th. Two planets were very close together, the sun and the moon. Okay, see how close they are? In 2 weeks, we get the full moon, the sun opposite the moon. Okay, that's an example of a cycle, a short cycle. Another example would be a long cycle, where we have Uranus, say, and Pluto, two outer planets that move very slowly. And when they get together, it's for a long time. We see that these two planets were together from 1960 to 1972. That's quite a long time. So stuff happens during that time. We could say this is what time it is archetypally.
So here's Stan talking about the planetary archetypes, particularly the powerful transpersonal outer planet archetypes.
So the first thing that we found out, which was absolutely mind-blowing, that if you look at the phenomenology of these 4 perinatal matrices, which I have extracted from people's psychedelic experiences without knowing astrology or being open to it, that they actually absolutely coincide with basic astrological archetypes. Okay, so we haven't really gone through it, but many of you read the books and so on, and we had talked about it in the training. So if you have the first matrix, the experience would be related to the oceanic, cosmic, being in the space, mystical union, dissolution of boundaries, paradise, heaven, things like that. What kind of astrological archetype would that be? Neptune, okay? The second matrix, oppression, compression, depression, starvation, guilt, what would that be? Saturn, okay. Then look at the third one. It's very, very complex. Birth, sex, rebirth, sexuality, as we'll talk about it, powerful clashing energies, and also encounter with biological material, elimination. What would that be? Pluto, okay? And then you have the fourth matrix, which is a sudden, unexpected resolution of a difficult situation, breakthrough, liberation, epiphany, rising to a new level of awareness. What would that be? Uranus, okay? So that in itself was amazing, you know. What is that about? But then we found out that you actually would have experiential confrontation with these matrices at the time when you have these planets as transiting planets. In other words, you can, if you are planning a session, you can get a sense from your transits what kind of archetypal domains it will take you. It's like the way I see it now, if you do the breath work, if you have a spiritual emergency, if you take psychedelics, you tune into the archetypal fields of your transiting planets, and you will get samples of experiences. Some of them biographical, some of them the corresponding perinatal matrix, and some of them past life experience that has that kind of archetypal energy in it. Or you actually enter the mythological realms, encounter mythological figures, and the realms, and so on. Okay, so when we go through these four matrices, you can think archetypically that the first matrix is the archetype of Neptune. You know, the second Saturn, the third Pluto, and the fourth Uranus.
Yeah, so Grof became connected with the kind of lineage that we outlined about the archetypal, the development of the human perspective and awareness on and of archetypes. When he discovered these four basic perinatal matrices, he discovered coex systems, the expanded cartography of the human psyche, all of which we cover in the previous episode. So if you haven't seen, you know, if you haven't been exposed to those, go back and watch the previous episodes. So he discovered that, which tied him to the lineage of the archetypes in the past. You know, Jung had mentioned the collective unconscious and these archetypal and these kind of archetypal patternings that inform human psychology. So Grof and Tarnas, Stan Grof and Richard Tarnas together discovered that not only are the archetypes emerging from the experiences that people have in holotropic states, experiencing psychedelic assisted healing or holotropic breathwork or whatever it is, spiritual emergency, like you mentioned. Not only are the archetypes coming up from the psyche itself of the individual, but they discovered that actually the archetypes are matched in a kind of a one-to-one way with the astrological archetypes, the archetypes from the astrological pantheon, the planetary archetypes. And so the discovery there was that there's a number of practical applications. So, you know, like Stan mentioned, you can have a sense of where you are in your kind of psychospiritual growth by looking at your astrological transits. What are the alignments? What you can look at your birth chart and see what kind of archetypal tensions are there for your whole life. You can look at what's called your transit chart, look at what's up for you right now. And it can give you a sense of the terrain that you're exploring in your psychospiritual growth, because you can be informed, oh, these are the active archetypes. And then when you see them in your experience, in your life, in your situations, in your holotropic states, and your psychedelic journeys, you can be cognizant. You can say, oh, look, there's that archetype arising. And so it has a very practical aspect for, you know, the medicine facilitator as well. It has a practical aspect because it acts as a kind of like an intake tool that can help them understand where the person is in their growth It can be like kind of like a GPS. It can help them, you can help pinpoint where this person is on the train and what type of material, help understand what type of material is coming up, anticipate what type of material is coming up. And in a larger sense, it took the whole development of Western thought and reconnected it back to the origin of the archetypes. If you remember, the origin of the archetypes was a kind of archaic understanding of the archetypes as gods and goddesses, which are governing divine forms outside of the human psychology that kind of govern the world around us, that may reflect aspects of human psychology. You know, so oftentimes they're in human form, but they inform the world around us, the situations we're in. And the kind of development of thought from there kind of narrowed down on the human psychology, saying that these are principles within the human psychology. They don't really have to do with the world around us. But then when Grof and Tarnas discovered that the archetypes are planetary archetypes, when we look up into space and we see the configuration of the planets and the archetypes that they're associated with, we're seeing reflected the inner space, the inner terrain within ourselves. So it kind of brought us back into a connection of the inner psychology with the outer world, kind of dissolved the barrier of the subject object kind of duality that really became very strengthened via the scientific revolution. So we can see that this is the next development in the human exploration of what are the archetypes, what are the archetypes. And as Art stated earlier, they allow you specifically to very intimately encounter those archetypes. When you're in your holotropic states on your psychospiritual growth path, and you look at your chart, you look at your transits, you can experience these very grand notions that we've been talking about thus far in the episode in a very personal way. And you can see how they inform your very intimately personal life. And again, reconnect that back with the grandeur of the universe itself. And so that's what we mean when we say an integration tool that's as fascinating as the journey itself. So yeah, that's the archetypal discoveries of Stan Grof and Richard Tarnas.
Well, thanks, James. When I first heard that talk by Stan, it was kind of knocked me out. I was driving, and I had been doing the breath work for a few years, and I had been reading Stan's books and studying his theory. And I was really well aware of the 4 perinatal matrices and had experiences with them in sessions. Then when I heard Stan mention the astrology part, how they were all matched with the 4 outer planets, I almost crashed my car. I was driving on the highway, and it was just such a mind blower that I had to I just let go for a second and had a wonderful experience. And I thought, oh man, this is it. I got to learn this. And that was about it. That's how I started. Yeah, it was the pivotal moment in my understanding, was finding out that there was a whole other realm of knowledge that I could get into that would help me understand what was happening in psychedelic experience. And I was, okay, I'll sign up. Let's go. And that's how I got into this completely. Just listening to Stan from that talk describe the 4 basic perinatal matrices matched with the 4 outer planets. So thanks for joining us today for Holotropic Psychedelic Integration, Episode 3.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
And see you next time.